Disability Resource and Information Training, Level 1, Section 2. This training is made available through the Disability Employment Initiative Round 5 grant, or more commonly known as the DEI Project, that Central Minnesota Jobs and Training Services was one of the implementation sites. This training was originally developed by the Alaska DEI Project and was modified by CMJTS staff. We hope you enjoy the training. I am Leslie Witowitz, the Development Manager here at Central Minnesota Jobs and Training Services.
And I'm Tara Brooks, Disability Resource Coordinator for Central Minnesota Jobs and Training Services.
We would like you to take a moment and write down what you hope to learn today. And if you do not get your questions answered or you didn't learn what you were expecting to, please feel free to email Tara or myself to ensure that we get you the information you are seeking. This is the checklist for Section 2. It includes all pertinent information, resources, and links. We encourage you to print or save this form. You will be able to reference this throughout your training and in the future.
The Section 2 learning objectives focus on disability culture, how people with disabilities and employers define accessibility, and understanding universal design and accessibility guidelines. The Olmsted Plan. The state of Minnesota is firmly committed to ensuring that people with disabilities experience lives of inclusion and integration in the community, just like the lives of people without disabilities. In 1999, the United States Supreme Court held that the unjustified segregation of people with disability violates Title II of the ADA. Olmsted versus LC involved two women with disabilities who were confined in an institution even though health professionals determined they were ready to move into a community-based program. The Minnesota Olmsted Plan is organized into 13 topic areas that cover different aspects of improving the quality of life for people with disabilities. These areas include person-centered planning, transition services, housing and services, employment, lifelong learning and education, waiting lists, transportation, healthcare and healthy living, positive supports, crisis services, assistive technology, preventing abuse and neglect, and community engagement.
The Access for All Manual. It can be found online and downloaded for future reference. It has WIA language, but the information and concepts shared are still applicable. This manual is a reference guide to meet the needs of customers with disabilities in the one-stop or career force centers. An example of how this manual can be used is as follows. You are a staff who are working with a customer who has disclosed a learning disability. Using this manual, you can learn more about learning disabilities, resources on learning disabilities for additional information and to determine how services could most effectively be delivered, and also to find out what other types of resources might be available. You can use this manual to help the individual determine the impact that employment will have on his or her Social Security disability benefits. You can find information on accommodations and assistive technology resources to assist the individual in determining accommodations that will lead to success on the job. While much of the material contained in the manual is original work of the Institute for Inclusion staff, there are places where the information was adapted from other sources, which are clearly noted. There are a lot of helpful tips in this manual. It will help you meet the needs of people with disabilities, how to comply with legal requirements, ensuring accessibility in a one-stop center. There is an overview of disabilities. There are several disability fact sheets. There are screening tools, job accommodation information, job placement information, Social Security disability benefit information and the impact that employment has, transition and youth services, disability services, the structure and funding. There is a list of acronyms and definitions and several disability resources. I highly recommend you download this manual for future reference. What is accessibility? It means different things to each individual. The following video helps to further explain this concept.
Hello. Last month I talked about accessibility a bit. We have to make accessible spaces a standard. If people were barred from accessing certain spaces, or videos, or images online, there would be an uproar. But oftentimes, disability is placed on the back burner. And when I talk about accessibility, I'm not just talking about ramps. Accessibility means different things to different people.
My name is James Rath, and I'm legally blind.
Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm autistic.
I'm Annie Sagara, and I have a disability that causes severe chronic pain, and I am a wheelchair user.
For me, accessibility means giving access to things that able-bodied people can receive.
To me, accessibility means making sure you always have a clear path and enough space between hallway walls and doorways for all kinds of people to move through with ease.
For me, accessibility means having large print, and I don't mean your large print, but very large print signs, so that I can actually see them 5 feet away, maybe?
To me, accessibility means sensory-friendly areas.
It means being able to enjoy online content like everybody else.
For me, accessibility means allow me to reasonably accommodate myself.
It means making sure your ramps are not at a completely ridiculous incline, which makes it nearly impossible for someone to wheel up on their own.
It means disability-trained staff.
It means being able to know what's going on at the airport and on the airplane when something happens.
Accessibility means when I'm in a public store or establishment, make sure it's organized. Things aren't cluttered and there's not a lot of mashing colors, because for me, my eyes move constantly in a vertigo effect, and if things are sort of cluttered together, I can't make anything out.
No surprise noises, large crowds, bright lights, or chaotic noise.
It means having closed captioning on films at school when you're being told to take notes during a film during class, and not having the teacher publicly ridicule you in front of the class and reread your incomplete sentences so that everyone can make fun of you because you couldn't understand the film without captions.
For me, accessibility means allow me to pinch to zoom on your mobile site, whether that means having the desktop site visibly available or enabling the pinch to zoom on your mobile site.
It means having at least one handicapped spot near your location, but more is definitely better.
It means warning me before something alarming happens.
It means not being shoved aside during job interviews.
For me, accessibility means natively allow me to change the contrast or the font size on your website.
It means flush ramps for those small steps that you might not notice if you're able-bodied. But I notice them.
It means having earplugs available.
It means not getting hit in the behind with the shopping cart when you're out shopping and being given a dirty look because you didn't hear them say, "Excuse me."
For me, accessibility means don't disable secondary or right-click with a JavaScript code on your website. Some websites like to disable the ability to copy text from their site and paste it somewhere else, or highlight and take it and post it on your website, and that's to prevent theft. However, that also takes away the ability for me to highlight your website and have my computer read it to me.
It means smooth, flat, spacious sidewalks. And don't plant trees in the middle of the sidewalks. What? Why?
It means clear and accessible signs so I don't get lost.
It means being able to know exactly what is wrong with you when you're at the hospital. Because sometimes hospitals will refuse an interpreter, and some will not even bother to write with you regardless of how many times you request it.
It means chairs with cushions, not cold, hard metal ones. That can be very painful. Or at least having some cushions available for those who need it.
It means not being left out when you're trying to have a social life and relationship.
It means image descriptions in alt text or brackets. It means audio descriptions for videos. It means captions for videos. It means transcripts for videos.
It means so many things, but most of all, it means being treated with respect and like a human being.
The Americans with Disabilities Act was passed 26 years ago. It's about time, and it's way past due, for spaces to be accessible to everyone. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all eventually.
The next 4 slides will address screening tool tips and different screening tools you can use with your customers. It is beneficial to complete the screening form with your customer. This allows room for more discussion and interpretation around the questions asked. If the customer completes it on their own, you may receive different results. The screening tools should be collected discreetly and remain confidential. It is not our role to diagnose. A checklist is really a guide. So if a customer answers yes to a question, it does not mean that they identify with the disability or condition. However, if they answer yes to the majority of questions, they could benefit from further specialized assessment from a qualified professional. When a customer experiences difficulty performing certain tasks, there is a possibility they may have a learning disability. Here are some screening questions that you can ask. There are times when staff may see indications that a customer may have an emotional or mental health concern. Here are some screening questions that you can ask. There are times when staff may see indications that a customer may have an alcohol or substance abuse problem. Here are some screening questions that you can ask. Keep in mind that it is important to not make assumptions. An individual may be acting as though they are using alcohol or a substance, but they may have a mental health condition or they started a new medication which may have similar symptoms. Next is the video, How Can I Help You?, which focuses on accessible customer service.
I've never tried to define disability for myself. It's one of those things that you know about its existence. You see individuals that have challenges, but on a day-to-day basis, you don't really think about it as part of your life until it becomes part of your reality.
I like to put ability instead of disability. I like to say, okay, I'm disabled, but with lots of abilities.
All disabilities, people with disabilities, have challenges because they either have a physical or a mental function which isn't working just the way everybody else's works.
Do you know what a disability is?
My impression of a disability is someone who may just need a bit more time or assistance.
In my view, a disability is an artificially created circumstance. I'm totally blind, and yet for most of the time, I'm not disabled. For example, when I'm sitting in a restaurant and somebody hands me a print menu, which is usually what I get, I instantly become disabled. Some restaurants now carry a Braille menu. I'm no longer disabled.
It's easy for me to go to school, to run up the stairs, to go down the hallway, to buy a coffee, all those little things. And for someone with a disability, it's so much more than that.
A disability is only a detour to where you want to get to.
And it doesn't necessarily mean somebody in a wheelchair. It could be intellectual, it could be vision, it could be hearing.
Invisible or visible, sensory, mobility, intellectual, or mental health. That would be my definition of disability.
We're not talking about disabilities. We're talking about people with disabilities. So it's the person we're talking about.
I actually have never stopped myself since my disability of not going to a store, women's clothing or a restaurant just because they have a step, because I feel that I want them to see me, how I had to get in there, because I obviously had to get help to just bump me up that one step.
The government has a vision of an accessible Ontario by 2025. There are examples already across this province of people moving to an accessible Ontario. So what makes a person's life inclusive?
Well, I've always known that the greatest barrier that people who are blind or others that are labeled as disabled face is not the physical inability, it's the attitude and perception of individuals, others, and society, but perhaps equally as important, the attitude and perception that we have of ourselves.
My life changed in an instant. I was injured in a motor vehicle accident 17 years ago. And I think all my family and friends just did not know how to approach me, actually, and how to sort of handle it. And I think that what I found is that I was the one that was able to make them feel comfortable around me by sort of talking about myself.
So to make an accessible world for people, we have to start looking at communication.
I think it's usually the first few seconds is what it will take for the two people to be comfortable with each other. And then it's great from there.
A lot of people feel that because I'm visually impaired that I can read Braille. And I don't read Braille. I need somebody to read the menu for me. And I would like them to ask me what I would like. I don't want them to ask somebody sitting next to me, because I know what I like and what I don't like.
A lot of people have this notion that since you can't see, it really doesn't matter if you have dark brown shoes or black shoes.
Often, when we take down a barrier for one person or help to take down a barrier for one person, we put up a barrier for another. Many times you'll hear people say, well, he's blind, but he may not be blind. He may be a person with a visual impairment. He has different needs. People who are deaf have different needs than people who have hearing impairments.
It's kind of absurd how little we know about people with disabilities in comparison to the rest of the cultures and the rest of the different groups of people that we live amongst.
The first thing you have to do is look at yourself. That's where education starts. Government can tell you, other people can tell you, books can tell you. But until you sort of look at yourself and look at someone you know who has a disability, that's how you educate yourself.
If a person doesn't understand the disability, then they don't know maybe how to socially interact with the person with the disability.
All Ontarians believe in accessibility, and they believe it's the right thing to do. Accessibility is about social inclusion. For the world to be accessible, everybody has to be able to participate.
A fully accessible society is important for everyone. It will allow many of us to enjoy a quality of life that most others take for granted.
It's about you and I and people who have disabilities being able to do the same things. As a business, First of all, you have to have policies and practices in place that recognize that you're taking accessibility serious and that you're participating in breaking down barriers for people. It means that you have to make your staff aware and that your staff have to be trained in how to serve people with disabilities and to have an awareness of what the various disabilities.
There's so many different aspects in running a retail store, and I think the first and most important aspect is customer service. And so it starts with myself, being the owner of the store, that when I'm on the retail floor, that I ask customers how they're doing and if they're finding everything they need. And it's important that our managers do the same thing and our floor staff do the same thing. So it carries right through the whole organization.
Our designers wanted to hear firsthand from the customer. They wanted to understand, what does it really take to make an exhibit more accessible for someone who's blind or someone who's deaf or a person who has autism, for example.
Right.
So we put together a committee of 10 people, and all of these different disabilities are represented.
I think a lot of people with disabilities want to feel independent and want to shop in a store that treats them like everyone else.
I mean, we try not to treat the person differently. We certainly have to treat your situation differently and make sure that we can accommodate you.
The accessibility in a store will influence a lot my family directly.
It's the utmost importance to have complete accessibility, and it goes along with independence.
Mais un bon service à la clientèle, ça c'est de l'or, ça c'est précieux. Et ça va tellement avoir un grand impact sur moi que je vais retourner à ce magasin-là, mais sans aucun problème, j'y serai fidèle.
I believe that somebody that's providing customer service needs to ask the right questions. They need to ask questions. They can't make assumptions, and they have to be an active listener.
And if each person reaches out and does one little thing, we're saying customer service here. I don't like customer service. I like to say people helping people.
Astra, how can I help you as a retail owner?
Good service, friendly conversation keeps me coming back to the same store.
Persons with disabilities spend annually in Canada $25 billion. So it only makes sense that if you're in business, that you look towards that sector to improve your business opportunities.
And what does it end up costing me? I'll tell you, nothing. Very, very minimal. And what do I get in return? In the last 3 or 4 years, we've built 6 homes with varying degrees of accessible features in them. 6 sales that I would never have gotten if I hadn't even reached out and tried to make those accommodations.
So it's about incremental steps and it's about small changes.
How can I help? Those are 4 great words. I had to count them up. How can I help? 4 great words, because they apply to anything.
That's a very warm and engaging thing to say to someone with a disability. How can I help you?
Often we're afraid to ask because we think we're going to offend, but sometimes the easiest way to learn is to actually ask the person about themselves and how can I help you to participate with me in whatever we're doing.
We all have to help each other.
By saying,
how can I help?
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 One of the more recent legislative actions to be passed was the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. On October 8, 2010, President Obama signed the Communications and Video Accessibility Act, or better known as CVAA, into law. It updates federal communications law to increase the access of persons with disabilities to modern communications. Some of the more highlights of this act are that web browsers on mobile devices by people who are blind or visually impaired need to be accessible. It creates industry record-keeping obligations. It requires changes to complaint and enforcement procedures. It tightens deadlines for the FCC to respond to consumer complaints. It requires an FCC clearinghouse on accessible communication services and equipment. It applies the hearing aid compatibility mandates to telephone-like equipment used with advanced communication services. It updates the definition of telecommunications relay services to include people who are deaf, blind, and to allow communication between and among different types of relay users. It requires interconnected and non-interconnected voice-over IP service providers to contribute to the Interstate TRS Fund. It directs the allocation of up to $10 million per year from the Interstate TRS Fund for the distribution of specialized equipment to low-income people who are deaf, blind, to enable these individuals to access telecommunications services, internet access service, and advanced communications.
Universal design is the design and composition of an environment so that it can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability. The goal is to be proactive from the onset of planning instead of reactive.
The facilities checklist or the building access survey needs to be completed by the site manager prior to a review. Recertification of Career Force centers occur every 3 years. All components of a building are identified, including the parking, pathways, entrance, common elements of the building, an accessible route, and features that are specific to a Career Force center. All interior walkways and aisles must be 36 inches wide. Elevators need to have braille and call buttons no more than 48 inches above the floor. Additional details can be found in the checklist. The electric curb cut video addresses accessibility and universal design.
Next time you enter your workplace, stop and think about how convenient it was to enter the building. You could choose to use the stairs, a ramp, or an incline to get to the entrance. You probably had more options when it came to opening the main doors, such as using a door handle or pressing the automatic door opener. Just 25 years ago, however, options were more limited. In fact, many people with disabilities had to make special arrangements before they could enter or use public buildings, or they were forced to use a service entrance. Public awareness of the importance of making buildings more accessible was raised when the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, was passed in 1990. Soon, entrance ramps became commonplace. The wheelchair icon that signals accessible facilities became a mainstay in public buildings. Curb cuts were designed into sidewalks to make it easier for people with disabilities to move from place to place. Then an interesting thing happened. The legal mandate to provide equal access quickly led to an increased demand for better, more user-friendly architecture. People soon discovered that accessible facilities benefited everyone, not just people with disabilities. The curb cut is a perfect example. As curb cuts became more common, people realized that curb cuts made life easier for everyone. Not only people using wheelchairs and walkers, but mothers and fathers pushing strollers, people riding skateboards and bicycles, people using dollies to deliver goods. A sidewalk with a curb cut is quite simply a better sidewalk. Likewise, accessible buildings are quite simply better buildings. And information and technology that can be accessed and used easily by everyone are quite simply better information and better technology. In this video, You'll learn about the important role you play in making sure that the hardware, software, websites, and electronic documents that you purchase or develop are fully accessible. Many people assume that information and technology are already accessible. However, the reality is that not all technology is created equal. It's also true that not all information is formatted in ways that make it easy for everyone to use. You play an important part in ensuring equal access. You are in a position to make sure that all computers, telephone systems, and other hardware you recommend or purchase are fully accessible. The same is true for the software applications that support them. You also can make sure that all electronic documents, videos, websites, and other communications that you create are accessible to everyone, including people with a wide range of abilities and physical limitations. You'll learn more about accessibility standards and your role in a few minutes. But first, it's important to understand the difference between accessible technology, assistive technology, and accommodations. An accommodation is a physical solution put in place to help an individual communicate better, learn or work more effectively, live independently, or participate more fully in community activities. Assistive technology, like screen reading technology called a screen reader, is a special kind of accommodation. Assistive technology is exactly what the name implies: a piece of equipment or technology that helps a person with a disability perform a task. Some examples of accommodations and assistive technology include a braille display, a desk that is higher or lower so that it functions better for a person who uses a wheelchair, or a video phone. An accommodation can even be another person who provides a specific kind of support to a person with a disability. For example, an ASL interpreter would facilitate communication for a deaf participant during a meeting. A job coach could support a person with an intellectual disability as he or she learns to do a job. Or a paraprofessional might be assigned to assist a child with disabilities in a classroom. Accessibility, on the other hand, is designed directly into the piece of equipment, software, website, or electronic document from the very beginning to make it easier for everyone to use. Accessibility applies to places, like elevators, curb cuts, and office spaces. It can apply to things like ergonomically designed kitchen tools that are more comfortable for everyone to use, not just people with arthritis or limited dexterity. Or access can apply to information technology, like hardware, software applications, and websites. It also applies to the way information is formatted for electronic use. Think of accessible technology and information as an electronic curb cut. Examples of accessibility include captioning all videos, providing text and images in alternative formats, buying software that allows the user to control how he or she prefers to use it, and designing websites that are intuitive and easy to navigate. So, who benefits when information and technology are accessible? It's easy to think of accessibility as a disability issue, but everyone wins when information and technology are accessible and easy to use. Look around you. You might be surprised to discover who uses accessibility features and why.
I use the captioning feature because I'm deaf. I use the captions to get all the information I need for my job.
I can hear, but I use the caption feature on this training video so I don't disturb my coworkers.
I can use my hands, but I prefer not to use a mouse. I would rather use the keyboard.
I use the audio whenever I can because I have dyslexia and it takes me longer to read information. I understand information better when it's read to me.
I have arthritis. Sometimes it's difficult for me to use my mouse. I like having the option to choose a keypad or a mouse to navigate my screen.
I work with data all the time on my computer and I'm blind.
So it's important that charts and graphs and other information be formatted in a way that makes sense to my screen reader software.
I'm not colorblind, but I work with data all the time. When I print out documents that include charts and graphs, I like to use black and white. I don't depend on the use of color. That way I can use a black and white printer, and it's cheaper.
I don't have these as my hands, but if the hardware and software is accessible, I can use the computer without any assistance.
Each of these people use the same technology in different ways. They may not realize it, but they're taking advantage of an electronic curb cut. They're all benefiting from built-in accessibility features that allow them to customize how they use a piece of hardware, software, a website, or electronic document. Each example illustrates how decisions made by the person who purchased or created the equipment or information made it easier for everyone to use it. These users have discovered that accessible information and technology is, quite simply, better information and better technology for everyone, not only people with disabilities. Equal access to information and technology is obviously crucial for people with disabilities who may require alternative ways to use hardware, software, websites, and electronic information efficiently. As of 2005, over 54 million people in the United States had a disability that limited some aspect of their lives. Did you know that 1 out of every 4 computer users has some form of visual impairment? That 1 out of every 4 computer users has a dexterity challenge? Or that 1 out of 5 computer users is deaf or has a hearing loss? The people represented by these statistics are your coworkers, customers, and end users. There are important economic benefits associated with accessible technology. Study after study shows that it's cheaper and more efficient to deliver government services online. But we can't reap the benefits if our citizens can't access or use information or services because they're not accessible. We will need to continue providing access through expensive brick and mortar facilities. Accessible technology offers economic benefits as well, by opening new employment opportunities for people with disabilities. Nearly 20% of the population has some type of disability in the United States. Yet fewer than 22% of adults with a disability have jobs, compared with 70% of adults who do not have a disability. It's also important to recognize that the number of people with disabilities in the United States is increasing. The population is aging. It should come as no surprise that the number of people with disabilities increases with age. More than half of U.S. citizens over 65 report having a disability that limits some aspect of their life. By 2020, the senior population in the U.S. will near 115 million. Another contributing factor is the unprecedented number of veterans returning from combat with permanent disabilities. In 2010, nearly 25% of veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan returned with permanent disabilities, particularly traumatic brain injuries, hearing and/or vision loss, and amputated limbs. Accessible technology will be critical to their ability to return to full employment. These are some of the people who will use the information you gather, the websites you build, the documents you create, and the technology you purchase. It's your job to provide technology and information that are accessible to everyone. Keep in mind that if information is available through the state of Minnesota, it must be accessible to everyone. That's the law. International, federal, and state standards have been created to help you create and purchase information and technology that passes the accessibility test. On the federal level, Section 508 is shaping the way technology is designed, purchased, and used. All over the world, web developers apply WCAG 2.0 standards to improve the accessibility of information delivered via the web. Section 508 sets basic standards that must be met for all electronic, information and telecommunications technology purchased by the federal government. Here are a few examples of the types of products and technologies covered by Section 508. Telephones, cell phones, and other telecommunication products, computer hardware, computer software, websites, media players, electronic documents, and PDAs. WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, play a similar role in the online world. These guidelines were created by the World Wide Web Consortium, or WWW. The goal of WCAG is to make sure that all web content is accessible by providing alternate ways to access information. While these standards were developed to make the web accessible for people with disabilities, these same options are useful for anyone accessing the web. The state of Minnesota has embraced both Section 508 and WCAG standards and incorporated them into a set of technology accessibility standards. When fully implemented, these standards will ensure that all hardware, software, and online applications purchased and used by state workers are accessible. The standards also ensure that all state-developed applications, websites, and content are easy to access by everyone. The Minnesota Technology and Information Accessibility Standards cover hardware, software, and online applications purchased, software applications, websites, online forms, and online surveys developed, webinars, live video conferencing, web streaming, and podcasts created or purchased, videos and documents created by state employees, contracts for hardware, software, videos, websites, electronic communications, and other information services developed or purchased on behalf of the state. These standards help to ensure that we make information technology truly useful to all Minnesota residents. We serve all customers as they expect to be served by providing information that is easy to access and use. We comply with federal accessibility standards and, as a result, are eligible to receive federal grants and funding. We limit potential exposure to expensive lawsuits. We provide the accessible technology and information needed to hire and retain employees, including those with disabilities. So, what's in it for you? A lot. Accessible technology is all about you. Accessible technology is also all about your coworkers and the constituents you represent and the consumers who depend on you. It's up to you to purchase and develop the hardware, software, websites, and electronic information that allows everyone access to the information they need when, where, and how they choose. Accessibility is everyone's job. You can help by following the state's technology accessibility standards, making sure that you incorporate accessibility into your planning, making sure that accessibility features are incorporated into every document, website, video, and technology solution you create, making sure that all new technology or equipment purchased meets state's accessibility standards.
Let good customer service be your guide. Meeting the needs of a person with a disability in the one-stop system is in many ways not much different than working with any other customer. While some information may be helpful, simply by practicing good customer service skills, you will be able to assist many customers with disabilities benefit from the services of the Career Force Center. Like any one-stop customer, people with disabilities should be made to feel welcome from the moment they enter the front door. If someone with a disability comes through their door, treat them the same manner as you would with anyone else. Respect, dignity, common courtesy, professionalism, and a helpful attitude. You want to create an atmosphere in where people are comfortable asking for help. Have you ever been in a situation where you had questions or needed assistance but didn't feel comfortable asking? It's important that the Career Force Center system have an atmosphere where all customers, including people with disabilities, feel comfortable asking for help. To do this effectively goes beyond posting signs that say, if you have any questions, just ask, or just by stating any questions at the end of an orientation. It means regularly asking all customers if they need help or need any information clarified. It also means responding to requests for assistance in a way that respects the individual and makes them feel glad that they asked. We value diversity. It's important that all staff value the unique skills, personality, and contributions of each individual and recognize that everyone has gifts and talents to provide. Don't automatically steer people with disabilities to disability-only services. Be sure to provide people with the options and range of services that you provide to everyone that comes through the door. Any business that practices good customer service regularly solicits feedback from customers in a variety of ways through both formal and informal mechanisms. Customer surveys, comment cards, focus groups, as well as conversations with individual customers can provide the system with a sense of how it is doing to meet the needs of all customers, including people with disabilities. You do want to go beyond customers for feedback. It should not end with the individuals that already use our services. We want to make efforts to solicit feedback from those who are not currently using the system to determine what steps to take so that they see us as a valuable resource. If you're not sure how to handle a situation with a person with a disability, ask them. Like all of us, people with disabilities themselves know best what they want and need. And be sure to relax. Don't get overly concerned about doing something wrong when you work with people with disabilities. If you use common sense, are friendly, courteous, and respectful, and provide opportunities for feedback, you are well on your way to meeting the needs of people with disabilities.
The National Center on Workforce and Disability Adult provides training, technical assistance, policy analysis, and information to improve access for all in the workforce development system. The National Center on Workforce and Disability areas of expertise include designing access for all, accommodations and assistive technology, developing employer relationships, helping customers find jobs, job-related support, legal requirements and guidelines, partnerships and funding, disability policy, and marketing and outreach. Pacer Center enhances the quality of life and expands opportunities for children, youth, and young adults with all disabilities and their families so each person can reach his or her highest potential. Pacer operates on the principles of parents helping parents, supporting families, promoting a safe environment for all children, and working in collaboration with others. With assistance to individual families, workshops, materials for parents and professionals, and leadership in securing a free and appropriate public education for all children. Pacer's work affects and encourages families in Minnesota and across the nation. The purpose of this website is to provide a single entry point to over 100 Minnesota state agency programs, products, and services that are devoted to the range of disability issues. It also provides access to laws, statutes, and regulations in pertinent disability-related areas. Disability Minnesota is brought to you by a collaborative group of state agencies. The Job Accommodation Network, otherwise known as JAN, is the leading source of free, expert, and confidential guidance on workplace accommodations and disability employment issues. Working toward practical solutions that benefit both employer and employee, JAN helps people with disabilities enhance their employability and shows employers how to capitalize on the value and talent that people with disabilities add to the workplace. JAN's trusted consultants offer one-on-one guidance on workplace accommodations, the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and related legislation and self-employment and entrepreneurship options for people with disabilities. Assistance is available both over the phone and online. Those who can benefit from JAN services include private employers of all sizes, government agencies, employee representatives, and service providers, as well as people with disabilities and their families.
The American with Disabilities Act, or more commonly known as ADA, is the Bill of Rights for individuals with disabilities. This website provides information on reasonable accommodations, auxiliary aids and services, accessibility, laws and policies, as well as reports. We encourage you to access these resources. The ADA requires state and local governments, businesses, and nonprofit organizations to provide goods, services, and programs to people with disabilities on an equal basis with the rest of the public. Some people think that only new construction and alterations need to be accessible and that older facilities are grandfathered, but that's not true. Because the ADA is a civil rights law and not a building code, older facilities are often required to be accessible to ensure that people with disabilities have an equal opportunity to participate. This website helps determine requirements for state and local governments and for places of public accommodation. The Minnesota STAR program. STAR's mission is to help all Minnesotans with disabilities gain access to and acquire the assistive technology they need to live, learn, work, and play. The STAR program offers device demonstration, device exchange, device loan, and reuse. There are several videos on disability awareness and different specific videos per disability. We found this autism awareness video extremely beneficial and helpful. This video provides things you wish you knew about people with autism and tips on how to care for someone on the autism spectrum disorder.
As some of you may know, April is Autism Awareness Month. What a lot of you probably do not know is that 3 months ago I was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which is an autism spectrum disorder. In light of those two things, I felt that it was very important for me to make a video about autism awareness. Now, I typically don't like awareness videos because I never feel like they give the information that is really necessary for bringing the actual awareness. So I'm going to try to not present this video in the same way as your average awareness video. I'm not going to be giving you facts or statistics. I simply have 10 things that I want to share with you. 5 things that we wish you knew and understood about us, and 5 tips on how to care for someone with an autism spectrum disorder. First, I want to talk about the things that we wish you knew about us. Number 1, we're different. You can't compare us to other people or think about us the same way you would think about everyone else. Because autism spectrum disorders are neurological, we might look totally normal on the outside, when in fact we think and behave very differently than most normal people. Number 2, we're not disabled. Sure, there are lots of things that can make it difficult for us to function on a day-to-day basis, but that doesn't mean we're not capable of living our own lives. Number 3, we don't always react appropriately. Usually, people with autism spectrum disorders have a hard time processing and understanding societal norms, especially in terms of social interaction. It doesn't mean that we're immature or that we don't care, it just means that sometimes we don't know how we're supposed to act or respond. Number 4, we don't usually understand emotion. Oftentimes, we won't react appropriately simply because we don't understand the emotion in that given situation. Again, it doesn't mean that we don't care, it's just hard for us to know how to react. And number 5, we're not broken. We don't need fixing, we don't need some kind of solution, and we certainly don't need a cure. We need people to love and accept us, and we need them to understand that this is who we are. Those were kind of the top 5 that are really important for me, and now I'd really like to share with you my 5 tips on how to care for someone on the autism spectrum. Number 1, be patient. Sometimes it can take us a lot longer to answer questions and do tasks, simply because we're thinking about it in a lot more detail than most people normally would. A lot of the time for people with autism spectrum disorders, especially people with Asperger's syndrome, it can almost feel as if we're speaking in a second language when we're talking to other people. We need a certain level of grace so that when we make mistakes, which we will, we don't have to be afraid that you're going to be upset with us. Number 2, listen. Most of the time, we say exactly what we mean to say, and we mean exactly what we say. We need people to listen to what we're trying to say, and to not assume that we might be implying something other than what we are saying. Number 3, try to avoid sudden, unexpected change. Sudden change can make us very anxious and nervous. In those situations, we don't know what to do because we haven't mentally prepared for them yet. Number 4, ask very detailed questions about things that we are interested in. For example, if somebody really loves airplanes, then you can ask them what is the biggest airplane that was ever made. Having very detailed questions about things we understand helps us to know where the conversation is going and makes it comfortable for us when talking to you. Number 5, please don't get frustrated with us if we don't look at you or make eye contact. We most likely are giving you our full attention. We just tend to not look at people who we're talking to because it helps us to concentrate on what we're hearing and saying. And the last thing that I want to share with you is that if you meet someone with an autism spectrum disorder, then you have met one person with an autism spectrum disorder. Autism spectrum disorders are very diverse and they affect people in many different ways. For example, one person might absolutely love surprises, while the other person is absolutely terrified of surprises. The 10 things that I talked about in this video are very informative and they apply to lots of people on the autism spectrum. But you have to remember that this is not an exhaustive list and it is not one-size-fits-all information. If somebody that you know has an autism spectrum disorder, I highly encourage you to do your research, to talk to them, to find out what makes them the way that they are, and what you can do to help them feel more comfortable interacting with you. Because I think I can speak for a lot of us when I say we really just want to be understood. And I think that that's what autism awareness is all about. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that this video has helped you understand a little bit more about those of us with autism spectrum disorders. Bye!
The term reasonable accommodations refers to changes in the workplace that enable people with disabilities to effectively perform the tasks associated with their job. Here are possible accommodations for a person whose reading concern is not severe, but it is still hard for them to read large amounts of material. Accommodations can help people with learning disabilities do their work well, even when their disability gets in the way of doing the work. Accommodations can include variations in workspace and equipment needed to do the task, communication of the work, the tasks themselves, and the time and place that the work is done. Here are possible accommodations for a person who tends to reverse or confuse number sequences when they copy or calculate figures. The Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, requires that reasonable accommodations be made by employers who have 15 or more employees. Accommodations should be based on the specific need of the individual with learning disabilities. Employers can claim that a given accommodation is an undue hardship and can propose a different one. The process of negotiating for reasonable accommodations is one of give and take. Here are possible accommodations for a person who has difficulty doing more than one task while managing interruptions from coworkers.
The following are some common myths around disability. That people with disabilities have higher workers' compensation rates. This is not true. Insurance rates are based solely on the relative hazards of the operation and the organization's accident experience and history, not on whether workers have disabilities. The next myth is that people with disabilities need to be protected from failing. People with disabilities have a right to participate in the full range of human experiences, including success and failure. Employers should have the same expectations of and work requirements for all employees. Another myth is that people with disabilities have trouble getting to work. People with disabilities are capable of supplying their own transportation by choosing to walk, use a carpool, drive, take public transportation, or a cab. Their modes of transportation to work are as varied as those of other employees. The next myth is that people who are deaf make ideal employees in noisy work environments. Loud noises of a certain vibratory nature can cause further harm to the auditory system. People who are deaf should be hired for all jobs that they have the skills and talents to perform. No person with a disability should be prejudged regarding to employment opportunities. Another myth is that considerable expense is necessary for accommodations in order for people to work. Most workers with disabilities require no special accommodations, and the cost for those who do is minimal or much lower than many employers believe. Studies by the Job Accommodation Network have shown that 15% of accommodations cost nothing. 51% cost between $100 and $500. 12% cost between $500 and $1,000, and 22% cost more than $1,000. Please download and print the Section 2 assessment, complete and give to your supervisor. We hope you enjoyed the training.